Luigi Mangione is brought back to New York to face charges. Who's going to take the lead role in prosecuting him, the state or the feds? Attorney Mark Bederow is here to help us figure that out.
Luigi Mangione has taken social media by storm. I'm Lainey Law.
And I'm attorney Andrew Myers.
And today we have New York defense attorney Mark Bederow. I don't even know how to get into this topic because even against my will, I log into social media. It's everything and everybody's opinions are so different and there's so many different points to touch on. But I guess I just want to hear first and foremost, how is this impacting you in New York, actually? Like, we're so far removed from it.
Well, out here, we get big cases that are national news all the time, with all the media that's out here. So it's not uncommon to get media circus cases. It's an everyday thing. This one is pretty big, even by crazy New York standards, for a lot of reasons. First of all, the idea of an execution in the middle of Midtown Manhattan during early rush hour, during Christmas season. In fact, I think it was the day they were lighting the Rockefeller Center tree several blocks away, right across from the Hilton Hotel, which is a huge hotel on 6th Avenue in Midtown Manhattan. So that freaks out people who live and visit New York as much as anything else. A lot of things people shrug their shoulders around here. An execution on 6th Avenue and 54th Street is that's going to rattle people. So, this has been a big story from the jump. As soon as people learned that the victim was the CEO of the largest healthcare provider in the United States, that certainly took it to another level and also invited, let's be honest, a bit of a kind of fringe element of wackiness to almost embrace cold-blooded murder. It is what it is. But there is a segment of the population who shockingly condones this, approves of this, thinks it's great. Then when it turned out that the defendant is an affluent, educated, seemingly intelligent, good-looking, so they say, young man, it adds a whole nother layer to this. And you put that all together and you just have a complete circus.
He was initially arrested in Pennsylvania and he's facing charges there. Then he was brought to New York under the indictment that had those charges. Were you surprised then, after he was brought to New York and he was indicted in New York, that the federal complaint was filed with multiple charges? Was that a surprise?
Well, yeah, given the way that this all went down. He was arrested in Pennsylvania for, he had possession of the gun, which I believe they've matched or are close to matching to the evidence in this crime. He had his manifesto, he had his fake ID. So, clearly he's going to get arrested and detained there for the normal extradition process to bring him back to New York for what, in New York State would be considered murder in the second degree, which is, unlike most states, murder one is a very rare thing. It has to be special circumstances, as the DA used in this case, alleging terrorism, which we'll get to in a minute. But usually, murder of a police officer, an intentional killing during the course of an intentionally violent crime, murder of a witness, a contract killing, a torture killing, more than one murder. Real special circumstances. So what you would have assumed would have been a second degree murder prosecution somehow morphed into him being brought back to New York. And then at the same time, which this is the surprising part, the feds immediately and hastily prepared a federal criminal complaint when, if there were going to be federal charges, which I believe there should be a federal case, by the way, which we can talk about in a minute. This is a ground ball, to me, federal case for a lot of reasons. But once he was going to be in New York State custody and the feds did want to get involved, you would have expected them to let him rot on Rikers Island for a period of time, in jail in New York City, and then methodically build their case, which would not be difficult to do.
No.
But do an indictment, and a federal indictment is very simple. I mean, all you need really is an FBI agent to go in the grand jury and read a bunch of reports. It's all hearsay. It's very straightforward. By doing it the way they did with a federal complaint, which is just a hearsay affidavit from an FBI agent, that's hasty, that's quick. That's usually what they do when they want to either make a street arrest or snatch somebody up off the street right away, when they didn't need to do that.
What's your take on why did the feds do that when New York already had? I mean, he was secure. He was in the facility. They had the indictment with a bunch of charges. As you say, I want to talk about them in a minute.
Territorial.
Why would the feds do that?
Territorial, and to start the process, I believe, of eventually elbowing the Manhattan DA out of the way. This, again, to me, is a federal case for a lot of reasons. Number one, I mean, you have a guy who specifically came to New York with the specific intent from another state for the purpose of stalking, surveilling, and executing. In fact, it's an assassination. Call it what it is. I mean, he targeted an individual specifically for death that he had never met, based purely upon his status as the CEO of United Healthcare. The way the federal code works, if there is federal jurisdiction and you commit an intentional killing with a firearm, that's death penalty eligible. New York has not had a death penalty for a number of years, and even when they did have it, they never used it. So just as a matter of playing ball with the defense from a leverage standpoint, that's a big deal. That's a game changer. Number two, you have to wonder if the feds were also concerned at the way the state was proceeding in this case. They chose to indict this as a first-degree murder case when they're really, all of us in the days before were wondering how the hell would they ever come up with a murder in the first-degree charge, and they went with the terrorism enhancement, which, I wrote a piece in the New York Times about this yesterday, seems really like a stretch, really dubious as a legal theory, but as a practical theory, just a catastrophic mistake. I mean, you're just inviting putting this guy's political views and all of that stuff front and center as part of the prosecution's case. I mean, why would you ever choose to take on a burden you don't need? And where, if you look at the federal charges, it's a nice, clean, straightforward, death penalty eligible. This guy's never going to get executed for this. There's no way, but it's eligible. So that's part of the leverage. But their case is very simple. He just came to New York with the intent to do this with a gun, intentionally killed someone. We're not getting into the politics. We're not getting into all this other stuff. And if we can convince a jury of that, he's guilty. Also, in federal court, it's much harder for the defense for a lot of reasons. I mean, New York State is one of the states, I'm sure Massachusetts is at some level as well, where the state constitution and state criminal procedure laws tend to be more progressive, if that's the right word, or certainly more favorable to the defense than, the federal constitution, federal rules of evidence, federal everything. So it's just an easier, if that's the right word, also for the defense to be in state court. Also, Manhattan is one of the most liberal jurisdictions in America. Right. And given that this case, the state case, is going to involve, again, by the DA's choice, all of his political views, because, that's an element of the terror charge. You can't keep that out. That's the whole point, is that the DA alleges he wanted to wreak havoc and sow terror by raging against the healthcare system. In federal court, the jury pool beyond Manhattan also includes Westchester County and what they would call the Hudson Valley, Orange County, New York, Rockland County, Putnam County, Dutchess County. That area is far more conservative than Manhattan, for sure. And the jury pool will consist of people I mean, we're generalizing here, but who may be far less amenable to some of the shocking behavior you're seeing by certain members of the public standing out there with free Luigi signs or applauding him online, treating him almost as a Jesus figure. I mean, it's really disturbing stuff, in my view, what's going on, treating this guy like he's some kind of hero because he, wanted to execute the leader of a company. I mean, that might work.
Legal question for you, and that is, in most states that I'm familiar with, and I'm not licensed in New York, even though I had family there as a kid, in most jurisdictions, first-degree murder is first-degree M is an intentional killing with malice aforethought. Then if you don't have those elements, they bring it down to second degree. What's different about New York's statute?
Well, again, New York makes classic murder, if you will, intentionally causing the death, and basically intending to kill someone and doing it. So, I mean, if you walk around New York and you just walk up to someone and shoot someone in the chest with a gun, like you said, in most states, that might be murder in the first degree. Under the federal system, assuming there's federal jurisdiction, otherwise crossing state lines or whatever, that's a death penalty crime. In New York, that's murder in the second degree. Again, in order to elevate it to first degree, you've got to have a police officer in the course of his duties, more than one victim, a contract killing, murder of a witness. It's just the way the New York penal law has been set up that almost every murder case in New York, not all of them obviously, but almost every murder case in New York is murder in the second degree. And this case is frankly, if you can get past some of the support for this guy and nullification and all of that, potentially, this case is an open and shut murder 2 case in New York. I mean, as a matter of, the identity of the shooter and the evidence against him, it's as overwhelming as, we've been led to believe based on press reports as it is.
I always have a problem when my clients come to me and they say that they have an open and shut case or a slam dunk case, because I've never or rarely seen a slam dunk open and shut case. But have you ever seen a case that has the level of, I just read through the federal complaint and I wanted to ask you some questions about that. But before we get to that, have you ever seen a case like this where you actually have the shooting on camera, where you actually have pictures of the person riding through the city on a bicycle, cameras finding his backpack? Have you ever seen a case like this where there is so much video and photographic evidence?
Well, this guy, isn't nearly as sophisticated as he intended to be, because if he had, he would have known that in Manhattan particularly, and certainly in Midtown Manhattan, where all the business and tourism and all of that is that it's like an Orwellian novel in Midtown Manhattan. There are cameras everywhere, constantly, and anytime anything happens in any public space in Midtown Manhattan, if the cops have to go back and look for video, there's a pretty good chance they're going to find it. So, the fact that this occurred in the part of town where it did clearly made it likely that there was going to be video. But when you factor in all of that video, even the video at the hostel where he was staying, where he essentially said, smiled for the camera.
Right.
Look, he wasn't exactly, he fled and he tried to conceal his identity. But on the other hand, he kept the gun with him, right? He didn't even wear gloves. He left DNA and fingerprints all over stuff at Starbucks right before the murder. Every taxi cab is going to have video. I mean, he must not have been in New York that much. He would have known that. And of course, he had his, Looney Tunes manifesto with him. So from an evidentiary standpoint, this is as open and shut as it gets. The wild card here are twofold. Number one, why they've made this a terrorism case. They've just invited the spectacle. And of course, number two is that there are people who feel great sympathy for him. And so nullification is always an issue. And what I would expect the defense to do, anytime you're going to use a nullification defense, you can't argue it, right? You have to kind of wrap it around something that's at least remotely plausible, and then you kind of dovetail it in. I think they'll wrap that around a psychiatric defense, and that'll be, in their view, the ticket in to try to get at least one juror to say, I'm not going to convict him because he's some kind of good guy, which is mind-boggling to me.
the next question I had for you is, how could I just heard what you said, they could mix in some kind of a psychiatric defense, but didn't he clearly, I'm not going to say it's an open and shut case, but didn't he clearly demonstrate that he was thinking about this by having that detailed manifesto and by, knowing where the guy was going to be and going there and then writing all this stuff out? How often have you ever seen in your career, and I know you started out as a prosecutor in Manhattan and now you've been a defense attorney for many years, how often have you seen somebody write that clear of a manifesto as to what they were all about and what they were going to do?
Well, not often. Obviously, most people don't, keep, a record of in that type of way. But look, a psychiatric defense is weak, but what it is stronger, even by 0.5% more than simply saying it's not me. I mean, look, he doesn't have great choices. So his best defense is that a juror says, I'm not convicting this guy, but you can't just argue to a jury, don't convict him because he's some kind of hero. So if you put forth the psychiatric defense on top of what the DA is trying to prove, at least in the state court case, all of his political beliefs and all of this nonsense is going to come out into light, and the defense is going to be positioned to say, well, how does a 26-year-old, educated, affluent, valedictorian somehow descend into madness, their view, such that he decides to throw his life away and spends approximately 3 or 4 months stalking and preparing to execute, a guy who just happens to be, a husband and a father of 2 young kids because he's also a wealthy CEO.
I'm going to come out of left field with the next question, and that is, in the law books, in law school, and not since, in my experience, really, there's a defense called necessity. Will he make some kind of, and I know this is spooky, will he make some kind of defense that, there was necessity here because he had these very strong beliefs that were held by him?
No,
that he had to do this.
He can try to argue through his lawyers anything he wants. Even in the state court case, a judge will laugh at the defense and say, if you think for a second, I'm going to allow you to argue in this courtroom that this was a necessary act. Now, if you want to, again, wrap that up as part of his psychiatric defense, that, God told him to do this, and this is a necessary thing in order to, save America from whatever. Again, assuming anybody wants to believe any of that stuff, I suppose that could be a component of a psychiatric defense, but he's never going to be able to literally present a defense that it's a necessity. And of course, if he tried that in federal court, his lawyers would be writing checks because they're going to get held in contempt and, that kind of thing.
That's serious. You were talking about the jury. How will they ever pick a jury in this case? I mean, this guy, we've talked about the Reed case and we've talked about the Idaho 4 case. I think those two, and I know I'll get comments for this, I think those two pale in comparison to this case. I mean, this case has gotten national attention since day one. As you pointed out, on December 4th, this crime occurred. The Christmas tree lighting may have been around the corner. I don't know. I don't live in New York as much as I love New York. But it's gotten massive publicity since day one, and every single day there was an update. Oh, we have pictures from the hostel. Oh, we found his backpack. Oh, we think he might be here or there. So it's gotten so much publicity. Do you think they'll ever be able to find a fair jury, federal or state court?
Well, I think the problem is it's going to be very difficult to get a fair jury in this case, but it's not going to be because of the publicity. It's going to be because of this referendum on whether this guy, who by all accounts, let's give him due process, presumptions of innocence and all of that, but by all accounts appears to be a calculated, cold-blooded, don't forget, he shot this man in the back 3 times, every shot from behind.
And there's video of that.
There is video of that. I mean, that's about as cowardly, not that any killing without reason is without law.
Well, I know what you're saying. I know exactly what you're saying.
It's particularly cowardly. But, in New York, again, a lot of cases are in the news, and the fact that it's publicity wouldn't be as much a concern as much as, especially in the state case where it's a terrorist. I mean, look, you're inviting the jury to say, is this guy a terrorist or not? I mean, that's what they've made the New York case about, which is like an own goal, right? I mean, it's literally kicking the ball into your own net. Why would you do that when the issue is, did he intentionally kill this man? And the answer to that is yes. And we're done. And they should be telling the jury, let's go home. What's for dinner? It's that simple. And instead, they have invited all of this discussion about the politics and what it's all about. I don't think that'll be as much a problem in federal court, but yeah, jury selection in this case will be harder than the Idaho case or Karen Reed. I mean, you look at the Idaho case. I mean, those are hideous facts. Obviously, got a guy who's accused of, just butchering 4 college students. I mean, that's horrible. But in that case, it's a lot of press. But you're going to get some jurors who are going to say, "I'm willing to be fair." In other words, no one thinks that guy's a hero. It's just, did he do it or not do it? I don't really, people don't care about him. Karen Reed is very similar. I mean, that case is like off the charts in the press, and everyone in that county, Norfolk County, Massachusetts, has an opinion. So that is a problem. But even with the allegations of police misconduct, as hard as it would be to get a jury, I think eventually you're going to find people who are going to say, I don't have to feel sorry for her or like or dislike her in advance. Even with everything I've been told, I'm going to do my best to be fair. The problem with the Mangione case is you're going to get potential jurors who could be like sleeper agents who want to get on the jury to make sure he doesn't.
Yeah.
I mean, this one is a whole nother level, which is another reason why this ought to be in federal court for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, within days after the judgment came down in the Alexander Murdoch case, 3 of the jurors were on Good Morning America. So I would hope that wouldn't happen. Lainey, can you help me? I'm really not good at these things. Can you help me show the federal indictment and the 3 of us at the same time? Mark,
so it's a complaint.
Here we go.
It's not an indictment. It's a complaint.
Yeah. I'm sorry. I misspoke. You're right. And Lainey and I were actually talking about that before we went on. That
it's a big distinction here. Yes. And that's part of, it's interesting. I mean, a complaint suggests the feds wanted to do this fast because it's more complicated to get in front of a grand jury and get an indictment. And so they rushed to do this knowing that he would be in custody. I mean, he wasn't going to be bailed out. I mean, this guy clearly, if he had been picked up from Pennsylvania and brought to New York State Court, would be remanded, held without no bail. And then maybe in a week or 2, the feds indict him. They bring him over to the Southern District. But they went out of their way to file their paperwork and snatch him up themselves first.
That's interesting that you say that, because when I first saw that, I thought it was an indictment. Then I read the caption at the top, and thank you for explaining that, because that was going to be one of my other questions. But I think you've done a good job explaining that. They're
going to say all the right things. The Manhattan DA is going to say this doesn't offend us, and the U.S. attorney is going to say, don't read into this. You absolutely should read into this. This is the feds showing up with very sharp elbows and saying, we're going to get this guy. And double jeopardy becomes an issue here at some point as these cases advance, but it's a one-sided problem. So the federal government or the federal case will not be impacted one way or the other by what happens in state court, under the dual sovereignty doctrine that has been, with double jeopardy constitutional jurisprudence, that the federal United States Constitution will not prevent the feds from prosecuting Mangione, even if he is already placed in jeopardy in state court. The converse is not true because, again, New York State has laws that are a little more favorable to the defense. And in the criminal procedure law, Article 40, I think it's Section 4020, there is a big problem that if he is placed in federal jeopardy or convicted or whatever, and it's the same conduct, the same transaction, elements of the crime are essentially the same. I mean, I don't want to get too deep into the weeds, but that will bar prosecution in state court. And so if he pleads guilty in federal court, the state case is gone.
Okay. All right. So that answers the next question that I had for you. And that deals with federal and state. What about those charges in Pennsylvania? They're relatively, I don't want to say minor, but they're not of the seriousness of the federal and New York State case. In Pennsylvania, I believe he was charged with several things, basically giving a false identification and the firearms charge. Do those go away, or would those ever be prosecuted, or is that like a side story right now.
I mean, again, it's all economies of scale here. I mean, you have a theoretical death penalty case, life imprisonment. Someone's alleging he's a terrorist. And then you have, he got apprehended in Pennsylvania with a fake ID and whatnot. So certainly of the 3 jurisdictions that have charges at the moment, the Pennsylvania ones are, not even on the radar. They are, I mean, from Mangione's lawyer's problem, dealing with that case would be like shuffling deck chairs on the Titanic. I mean, who cares? I mean, really.
Exactly.
He's got a potential death penalty to worry about, which I don't think he'll get, but that's obviously concern number 1 for them.
They probably just brought those charges in Pennsylvania, so they had a basis to hold him. I mean, they had to have a basis to hold him in Scranton before they actually extradited him to, not Scranton, Altoona. I should know better. I'm from Pennsylvania. But in any event,
they could, I mean, look, if they obviously believed that he was the suspect, they could have detained him. New York files the extradition paperwork, which simply says we have charges for this crime in New York, and you establish it's the right person. And, every state is a signatory to this compact between the 50 states. It's codified in federal law. They would have had no choice to send him to New York anyway. But I agree with you. Obviously, charging him with crimes in Pennsylvania, getting bail or having him held even on a different basis, just dots I's and cross T's to make sure there's no way in hell that this guy got through any loophole to get away before he got hauled back to New York.
Now, most of the legal documents I'm used to seeing, and I've been practicing for 30 years, a little bit more than that. It's just a piece of paper with a lot of printing on it, and then it's easy now because you do it on a word processor. I myself have never seen a complaint or an indictment that looks like this. The firearm the shooter used appeared to have a sound suppressing device or a silencer attached to the front of its barrel. A still image from the security camera video of the shooting is provided below, not only in the level of detail, and I know that in complaints in the last couple of decades, we've been all told by the courts to be more specific, but I've never seen a complaint, A, that's this specific, and B, that is illustrated like this. Have you ever seen anything like this?
Yeah, I mean, in the last few years, technology is improving, and of course, this is the Southern District of New York, or as people call it around here, the Sovereign District of New York. It's not surprising. I mean, there's bells and whistles, and pictures are worth 1,000 words, and they're making it clear that we have sufficient cause to justify the charges, and it's pretty compelling. I mean, that picture is obviously him, which matches, the guy who pulled the mask down, and
right.
Yeah,
that's the phony ID that I guess that they found him with in Pennsylvania, and it was a phony New York driver's license. I've just never seen anything quite as detailed as that. I mean, we've all seen this picture on TV or online, wherever you get your news. We've all seen this, but to actually have them inserted into a complaint, I thought you said that they put this together really quickly rather than having to go to a grand jury, and you're probably right. But the quality of this complaint, it's letter perfect, and the pictures that they use in the complaint, tracking him around. I mean, there he is walking along the street. There he is on his bicycle in downtown Manhattan. Just the level of detail. I thought it was amazing. And Lainey and I argued about this a little bit before we came on, that just the number of security cameras that are in Manhattan. I mean, they're everywhere. They're absolutely everywhere.
And anytime anything happens in public, they just go back and look. And I mean, you should know that, any of you listening, if you go to New York and you're in public, you're going to be on camera. I mean, no matter where you are. And there's only so much you can do, but it is literally impossible to avoid being picked up on camera if you are on the streets of Manhattan. There's just no way. Now, did he try a little bit by putting on, COVID masks? Yeah. He went to the George Washington bus terminal, which is way uptown, way off the beaten path, as opposed to the main bus terminal, which is in Times Square, which is busy, crowded, and is even more public. Yeah, he tried, but there was no way that this guy was going to commit a murder. Literally in the busiest part of Manhattan during the busiest time of year when people are out there, and think that he's not going to get picked up. I mean, he's not that clever is the bottom line, if he really thought he planned this well.
No. Does this set a bad precedent in a way? I mean, it's as close to a slam dunk as you're ever going to get. It's as close to an open and shut case as you're going to get. As much as I hate using those terms, I think you're right. But does this set a bad precedent in that, people are going to see this? People are going to see this on TV, online, podcasts like this, reading the complaint. And the next case, they're going to say, well, you don't have me on camera doing it. You don't have any evidence, because how often you have a case like this where the perpetrator is actually on a video doing the crime. I mean, similar to people say, well, there's so much CSI on TV nowadays and the Lifetime channel, this whatever, that if you don't have the DNA, if you don't have the fingerprints, if you don't have all that, crime scene stuff, that's something that the defense can say, hey, you don't have the evidence. Is that a deal?
But that happens anyway. I mean, certainly from a defense standpoint in any given case, if identity is an issue, the lack of evidence where the argument is there ought to be evidence may suggest it's not him. I mean, that's going to be made in every case. But look, obviously this guy is going to be priority number one. I mean, they're not going to hold back on where cameras are located or the fact that they exist everywhere. They're going to go at this guy full bore, notwithstanding, again, that there are certain segments of the public who think he's some kind of folk hero. Law enforcement is going to look at this guy as must be convicted at all costs. I mean, the idea that somebody, because they have a grievance that they perceive with, the capitalist system and bad people who make a lot of money and deny claims, somehow authorizes me to get a gun and just stalk them and kill them in cold blood. I don't think, if you want society to continue, that, we should tolerate that, obviously.
Yeah. Now, I one of the reasons I didn't want to do this, and Lenny had wanted me to cover this case before, and others have asked me to do it before. One of the reasons I didn't want to do it is I didn't want to express my real feelings about this. That book, and I really don't want to get into it, but that book, Delay, Deny, Defend, is a book that back in the days before I did podcasts and when I was doing blog articles, I wrote a blog article on it. And I've used that book to show my clients why insurance companies, I'm a personal injury attorney primarily, and I've used that book to show people why the insurance company is not willing to give them a fair settlement. But I've never, and as much of an advocate for that book as I've been, I've never once ever, it's never even crossed my mind to tell people to take that kind of this is why I didn't want to, because I'm almost speechless. But my point is, it's a very well written book. It documents how the insurance companies, do everything they can to delay, deny, and defend against your claim. But nowhere in that book does the professor who wrote it ever advocate anything like this. Never. And so what you kind of alluded to this before, but what do you make of the fact that, a guy that, as you said, did a cold-blooding shooting in the middle of Manhattan, all of a sudden, and I don't want to get into it, we're not going to show the pictures. I know they're out there. What do you make of the fact that he's kind of, sort of, and I hate to even say it, become a folk hero?
I think it's disgraceful. You don't have to like or approve of the insurance industry. I mean, a lot of people have some real good grievances about, look, they are business, right? They make money by denying claims because they don't hand out money. They are programmed to, if possible, deny. I get it. Right. That's part of the system. You may not like it, but that in a civilized society will never justify or allow any particular individual to just say, well, I'll tell you what, I will eeny, meeny, miny, mo, pick him. Okay. He happens to be the CEO of that company, and just decide to walk up to him and shoot him in the back. And I think for people in the public to say that this guy is either a hero or that this is somehow okay because the insurance company kills people, again, that's a different debate. I get it. To anyone who says that this is anywhere near okay, assuming he did it, again, due process and presumptions of innocence, all that apply, but the evidence is pretty strong, is, I think, outrageous. I mean, where do you draw the line? I mean, am I going to be allowed, because I don't approve of someone's politics or I think they do this, I can just walk up and shoot? I mean, again, if you want to have a civilized society, it's stunning to me, some of these people standing around with signs or lauding him online. And I mean, you've even seen some interviews with media members who were sitting there saying, "Oh, but he's so good looking," and like it's a joke, as if that's
crazy. To me, that's crazy. First of all, I don't find he's that good looking. Second of all, it's irrelevant. And third of all, there's actually, and I'm not going to mention her name, there's a United States state senator in Massachusetts who had the gall and the nerve, and I hate bringing politics into this, but she started saying, it's a horrible, terrible, awful thing. But you can only push people so far, which I thought was a horribly inappropriate thing to say.
It's inappropriate and irresponsible. I mean, what message are you sending as a United States senator that you somehow empathize with a guy, which, by the way, there's been no evidence, even giving this a forum is in some ways problematic, but there's been no evidence that either Mangione or anyone close to him were even customers of UHI or United Health and had some kind of grievance or reason to personally dislike them. In fact, all the evidence, at least from this manifesto and everything else, appears to be that this guy is railing out against the healthcare system and just decided he's the one. I mean, who in their right mind applauds that? And again, you can go after a CEO for being of any company, the banks, insurance companies, whatever, for being bad people. But, there are 2 young kids who don't have a father today because this guy somehow decided to do this. And, imagine being those kids. And I know this man was either divorced or estranged, but, whether he had a girlfriend or other family members that have to see people online cheering for him as if, that this was a justifiable act. Now, this is different than, like, for example, the criticism people in the Karen Reed case, perfect example. How could you cheer for her and, all that? Because they think she's innocent. It's different, right?
And there's evidence that there's good evidence that she's not guilty.
They're not
strong evidence. Yeah.
They're not disrespecting John O'Keefe. They think Karen Reed is innocent and is being railroaded. Nobody disputes, realistically speaking, that Mangione is the killer. Right. And these people that are protesting are excusing it as some kind of justifiable act because, Brian Thompson deserved it. That is sick.
It is.
I had never even seen anything like that because it's just like how many, stories you hear about every day that just gets swept by the media. And all of a sudden, my timeline is all people just being like, look how hot this guy is. It's like you scroll through TikToks and they have like songs that are like romanticizing. My brother's like texting me is just like, oh, what do you think about this? I'm like, somebody died. What do you mean? What do I think about this?
I think, he's entitled to due process and all of that. He's entitled to a vigorous defense, whatever he believes is in his best interest. And if he's convicted and sent away for 25 to life or life without parole, I'm not going to tell you that's undeserved because the victim happened to be the CEO of an insurance company. If he gets convicted after due process, in my view, that's certainly just.
Yeah, I've used that book a number of times with my clients to explain why we're having trouble with the insurance company. I've been a big advocate of that book, but I think it deserves restatement that nowhere in that book does it even allege or infer anything like this. It's a very peaceful book. I don't like insurance companies. I fight with them every day, but it's amicable. Yeah, I've actually gotten to know some adjusters. I've actually befriended attorneys who are defense attorneys on the other side. It's got to be an amicable, reasonable, professional difference that we have. We have a real difference of opinion. Attorneys and insurance companies, but it's just.
I can even go stronger than that, meaning like, there are people who may have a bona fide, true grievance and hatred for an insurance company who was just cold, cruel, mean, heartless, that caused people damage, relatives to, denying claims, all that kind of thing. And you can hate the insurance company. You can protest the insurance company. It's still America. You can say whatever you want. But one thing you can't do is get a gun, walk up behind the guy in the back and just shoot him to death. That you can't do, no matter what.
Yeah, I'm having a real problem with a particular bank, and we're not going to get into it. And as angry as I am about them allowing fraud charges, the thought wouldn't even enter my mind about resorting to something like that. So, Attorney Bederow, thank you so much for your time. Do you have you've been really articulate, and we really appreciate you giving us that time. Do you have any closing thoughts?
No, just, it is surprising that other than there is a federal and state thing going on at the same time, but I think you'll see in the weeks and months ahead that, at least my view is that the feds will clearly take charge of this, and that if the goal of the exercise of law enforcement is to make sure that there are less shenanigans and less courtroom proceedings that are going to devolve into politics and railing against the healthcare system, this is a ground ball federal case, and I think that's where it's going to end up. And I think when all is said and done, if there's a prison sentence to be served, it's going to be in a federal prison, not New York State.
Right. Lainey, I always put you on the spot in these episodes. Do you have any closing thoughts for us?
Oh my God. I hope that the world is able to find peace, because sometimes it just feels like every day more and more crazy situations like this are happening. I think you made an excellent point in pointing out that the tree was going to be lit. Anybody who's been in New York during the holiday season, people travel around, not even just the States, even just the world, to see like what New York is like in November, December.
Listen, the Hilton is 1 block from my office, right? I mean, anybody just going to work could be walking down there, wrong place, wrong time. Guy has bad aim, kills an innocent. Then what? I mean, would he be a hero then if he meant to kill Brian Thompson, but he shot a baby? Would these people still say, yeah, but he meant well? He just is a bad shot. I mean, where do you draw the line here with this stuff?
And like a lot of the dialogue too has been like, what, like, would people be still, and like you said, not to get too far into politics, but a lot of people have pointed out is just like, had he been Black, like, would you still have seen this amount of media like fascination if he wasn't just like a cute white guy? Like, would he be put on this pedestal? So
I don't know. One thing I think that people do find fascinating, which does make it a bigger case, and this isn't a race issue so much as the guy was highly educated, highly affluent. He's railing against the economic harm of health. I mean, he was wealthy. He was the valedictorian of his class. He's young. He's got the world, at his feet kind of thing. And he turns to this, where he's probably going to spend the rest of his life in prison.
What a waste.
Yeah, but I think that adds, definitely to make, people are more interested in saying, why would a guy with everything that he had at his feet resort to this? And again, plan it for months and months, and maybe he's crazy, but not by the legal standards,
right.
Certainly in the courtroom, given his planning it out, concealing his identity, lying about his identity, attempting to flee the scene. That's all suggestive of, I know what I'm doing and I know it's wrong, which is not legally insane, as they say.
So he really has no defense. All right. Thank you very much for your time.
Nullification. That's
okay.
his defense.
Thank you.
Whether you are in the grocery store, the gas station, or anywhere else, please remember to be kind to people. You don't know what they're going through. And the same goes for our comments section. We want you to comment, but be nice, be kind, be positive if you can. And thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe. Have a good one.